So I'm holding a lot of things because I realized I'm vain and I didn't want to remove my earrings to put the headpiece on. So let me start myself out here. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's really an honor. I'm going to be speaking as well for some of you who are going to be here tomorrow. That's much more UN-y. So today, I'm taking a little bit of the UN hat off, and I'm going to speak to you as Abby. I hope that's okay. And by the way, I found out 2 days ago I was speaking, so it starts off really strong, and then we'll see how we finish. Okay. When people ask me how I came to this work being my entire life on ending violence against women and girls, I don't start with the UN. I don't start with global strategies, normative frameworks, mandates. I start with my own lived experience. My experiences that shaped me before I ever even knew the words gender equality, human rights. I didn't even know that violence against women and girls was a sector, or that sexual reproductive health and rights was also a sector, actually sometimes even a subsector under the broader health sector. And since I'm here in Ireland, I also thought it would be fun to share, because I was thinking about my early life and where I started. So of course I started to think about my mother, my nana, my aunts, and what do we call them in my family? We call them the Porter girls. And where did they come from? And I know I'm not going to say this right, but Donegal. Yes, straight, those ancestral roots go right back to Donegal, where my family migrated through Quebec and landed in Aroostook County, Maine, a very, very rural part of the United States, where we still today run the Porter Katahdin potato farm. And when I think about the Porter women in my family who carried so much hardship with dignity, who survived more than they ever named, who taught me early on that resilience is not abstract, it's lived, it's embodied, and thankfully it's passed down. And yet beneath some of that resilience, beneath some of that beauty, there are at times things that you could just feel were a little bit off. Those black eyes that were not quite covered well enough with foundation. The sudden silences at family gatherings, and mind you, my mother has 91 first cousins, so silences didn't come often. Stories that kind of got cut off mid-sentence. Violence wasn't really distant in our community. It lived among us, it shaped our worlds. When I was in high school, I remember, something's off. There's something to what's happening here with girls, with boys. There was always whispers in hallways. High school kids that have been navigating the weekend parties that ended with closed-door conversations. Oftentimes, I ended up being a social worker, with me trying to help people figure out if they had been raped. At that time, we really didn't know what consent was, and certainly if you had anything to drink, then it was definitely your fault. We really had no support systems, we didn't have information or education, and so usually it just kind of ended with, well, I was drunk, or he was drunk, or it was probably my fault anyway. What I think I was starting to understand at that time right before I left Maine and went very far away to college, was that the kind of experiences that we were having, the kind of violence that I was seeing, I was witnessing, but didn't even know what it wasn't cultural, it seemed patterned in some way. It seemed normed, and really, I realized later that it's quite structural. And I knew that because when I went to college, I started working at Planned Parenthood, also in rural communities, this time not in Maine, in Colorado. And those patterns seemed to come up again. But it was a different setting, it was different dynamics. I worked in family planning clinics in the southwest part of the United States, which is, incredibly rugged, incredibly rural. Those clinics were the only place that women and girls received, frankly, any medical care, let alone specific care. And I recall adult women at the time, I was in my early 20s, coming in, and they would come in for their Depo-Provera shots. Even though they hated those shots, they really wanted the birth control pill. But it was much easier to hide family planning in a shot than having birth control packets at home. And I would administer the shot, and then afterwards, I would be filling out their records, and they would say, please, don't put that in the record, because my husband checks everything. Coercive control disguised as care and love. And these women seeking health care in secrecy just to maintain autonomy over their bodies. And these were not isolated cases. They were reminders of a universal reality, really, that violence follows women and girls across age, race, ethnicity, geography, economics, circumstance. Thankfully, at that same time, I was in school, and I started to have language. I was a sociology student. And that's again where I started to learn power, inequality, patriarchy, structural, autonomy, and my favorite two words ever, bodily integrity and bodily autonomy. That kind of fundamental truth that my body is mine. And that took me in a long career in reproductive and sexual health. And at some point, I traveled to northern Thailand. I was working for Planned Parenthood Association of Thailand, and then somehow or other, I made it to Chiang Mai, and that's where I met the incredible Nadine Ferris France, who you all know here, I'm sure, a mentor, a friend. Nadine and I worked together at an organization called Health and Development Networks that also taught me very early on that health and rights are inseparable. We worked and we supported communities impacted by HIV, women living with HIV, helping them to tell their own stories, to speak their own narratives, to challenge stigma and discrimination, and most fundamentally, and I think this is something that has also shaped my entire life, my entire career, is that persistent and urgent need to hold governments and institutions, including the UN, accountable. I then moved on, I got my social work degree, and I moved back to Thailand, and I worked for 4 years in the mountains between Myanmar, Burma, and northern Thailand in the Karenni refugee camps. I worked with, oh my God, these incredible, unbelievable women, Mubi, Teka'u, these women who were enduring so much, had no formal systems around them that would help them. The Thai system rarely was interested to hear a case of sexual violence, particularly if it was a case impacting a refugee woman. So what did they do? They created their own care and accountability systems. So I watched their leadership, that resilience, and I think it's taken some time, and I think we're getting there, and now we talk a lot more about that resilience and leadership of women's rights organizations, women human rights defenders, and thankfully more now at the UN in recognizing how sustainable these women and movements are to peace and to development. I think, for a long time, my family members would always ask me, why are you still working in gender-based violence? That's still happening over there? It was hard sometimes to wind the story back to, my own home or my own communities, because it was always something happening over there, happening in other cultures and other contexts. And in my 3 decades of work, of course, I know, that it's exactly the opposite, that the experience of violence, in whatever form it may take, emotional, physical, psychological, just the feeling of not being safe in a public space. Don't even get me onto online spaces now. It does not discriminate. It crosses borders more easily than most of us can. It affects women in government ministries. I'll never forget working and living in the South Pacific for many years and working so closely with these unbelievable directors of the National Women's Machineries, working hard on multi-sector interventions for gender-based violence, setting up shelters, systems, referral systems, only to also know that many of them were going to those very same shelters in the weekends. Working with women, leading humanitarian response, rebuilding their lives after displacement. So from all of the places that I've been and gone to, what I've always seen is that the architecture of violence remains alarmingly consistent. And even today, so alarmingly prevalent. I was on a panel last night speaking about violence against women and girls in humanitarian contexts, and it really took me a while to not just go on a soapbox of, this is one of the most urgent public health emergencies of our lifetime, and it is also an incredibly solvable problem. And I had to read a statistic a couple of times. Sorry, I can't see you, I have my glasses on. The Special Rapporteur for Conflict-Related Sexual Violence, Pramila Patten, who in her last report on the massive increase of reported cases of conflict-related rape and sexual violence, and she said that the world right now spends more in one day on war than we do in an entire year on gender-based violence. And today, one woman or girl is killed every 10 minutes by an intimate partner or family member. That was the lead from our 16 Days campaign last year. So no country has solved this problem, no community has solved the problem. There has been progress. I will talk about that tomorrow. And here we are, 2025, still looking for safety in public spaces, and now confronting the digital world, a whole other space. Deep fakes, doxing, non-consensual imagery, I'm sure you've all talked about it, disinformation, harassment, all the algorithms that we have in our communities and societies just magnified in the online world. Shaming girls, driving young girls to suicide and abuse. How many women, public leaders, do I know who have been targeted explicitly to bring down their leadership? How many women do I know right now who will not consider running for public office because they do not want to confront the potential of that? So it's the same new platforms, the same inequities, the same, inequality, just sort of replicated and scaled now globally and online. And I think now when I at this point in my life, when I do dream a little bit about going back to that potato farm and just picking potatoes, I remember the importance of persistence. All the women human rights leaders that have been pushing for so long. The young people, thank God for any of you young people who are still sitting in this audience today, because we need you. So many women who gave me opportunities, really frankly, long before I ever earned them, who challenged me deeply, who trusted me, and really helped me show what principled feminist leadership looks like, and what principled feminist leadership can look like also in the UN. I've had so many mentors throughout my life, and I don't want to tear up. Back to my own family. And now I'm a mother with 3 kids, 1 girl and 2 boys. And that's a big responsibility. And I am so cognizant of where I am in this time in my life in terms of passing the baton, in terms of my own family getting older, my mother getting older. And I am cognizant of the time that we're in right now, the backlash that is there, that is very real. That when I left my own country in 2015 and went to the Pacific, I came back and my daughter has less rights now than when we had left. And I want to encourage everyone to keep up this work. It is so important. It is so vital. And it is so needed to stand right now in this moment for the conviction that our bodies are ours, that gender equality is good for all of us, and that we will hold on to that hope, that persistent hope, and the love for each other, that we will eventually, I know it's like UN Women will say in like 130 years, at the pace that we're going, we're going to get somewhere. But eventually, I hope it's quicker than that, we will get to a place where we live in a safe and free and equal world, no matter where we are. And so I thank you for listening to this little bit of a different way that I would come onto a stage, because it's usually with the global statistics and the mandate and the normative frameworks, which some of which I may speak about tomorrow. But just to share a little bit about who I am and what my journey has been in this very, very, very important space of health and rights, accountability and justice. And that's all I have. Thank you.